In 2001 and 2002, all over Charlottesville, signs popped up in people's yards. They were plastic, spread across a metal stand and said on one side, "Stand up for peace," and the other, "End war now." And over time, one sees less and less of these around town. They are so faded that I can't recall whether they were originally blue or just purple now faded to blue. And I've heard a few people mention recently, humbly, that when they do see one, it crosses their mind to wonder, in the war, it doesn't feel like we're at war for some people. And perhaps this question niggles its way up to the surface because one wonders, am I really living my values as a peacemaker? And it also raises the question, what does it feel like to be at war? So I've discussed this question with folks over the last few weeks and discovered that the answer seems to depend somewhat on generation. Folks who lived through World War II had to live with whatever cars or tires or kitchen appliances they already had before the war began. None of these things were manufactured for civilian use during the war. A friend of mine recollected that he was 13 when the war broke out, and his Boy Scout troop was organized into fire watchers in case of bombing. And on Saturdays, his scout troop would go door to door to gather the goods that were saved by each house to be recycled for the war effort. Due to the shortage of metal, people saved tin cans, toothpaste tubes, and any kind of aluminum foil, including aluminum foil from cigarette packages. I think some of you might remember that. Every Friday at school, children could buy savings stamps. One could walk down the street and see flags hung in the windows of homes that had a family member in the service, or gold stars if a family member had been killed at war. One rarely saw men between the ages of 18 and 45 on the streets anywhere. So simply put, World War II affected everyone's everyday life in the United States. One of the 5-star generals in World War II was Dwight Eisenhower. He went on to become president of our country from 1953 to 1961. And I'm going to share a quote from a speech that he gave on the occasion of his leaving office after serving 2 terms. In this speech, he's explaining how he has seen war change from World War I through the Korean War. He does assert that a vital element in keeping peace is a strong military, but he warns that the nature of armament and preparedness is changing due to changes in military technology and affecting many more areas of society in different ways, such as, we might say, or he gave the example, scientific research grants given to universities. So I quote now from his speech. This is 1961, Dwight Eisenhower, about to leave office. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry, I want to read that again. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. Some of you may remember that speech and the advent of the term military-industrial complex. Now, another generational difference in how people experience our country at war is the draft during Vietnam. For young men who reached the age of 18 in the late 60s and early 70s, they had to go register. Women were not drafted. but many had boyfriends whose lives were shaped, and everything was under the shadow of wondering, am I going to be asked to go and kill people? Many World War II veterans were greatly concerned as they saw the next generation go to Vietnam with such a confusing mix of rationale from the politicians. And yet, during the draft were deferments. People with medical conditions and people who were at college were allowed deferment, and therefore I heard it became common for boys to go to college, whether or not they actually were interested. Boys who then flunked out or couldn't afford or never had a cultural expectation of college, they went to Vietnam, and hence many minorities were unequally sent overseas. Now, after the Vietnam War, time and modern technology created another generational difference. How far away can we be from people while we are killing them? Studies have shown that it's very hard to get people to kill, and so modern psychological insights have been employed to shorten the amount of time from when someone identifies a target and when they shoot. And as one of the latest modern technologies, we have our drones, also called unmanned aerial vehicles or remotely piloted aircraft. And finally, may I venture to say that this most recent generation, those who have called themselves adults since 2001, mostly experience war on the home front as a nation of rallies. Rallies to protest the war, rallies to support the troops. And I know that some of you attend both. So if so much has changed over the generations, is it possible that we've developed a new normal? And so we come back to the question with which we began. When we see the peace signs on the lawns faded, are we a country at war? Are we a country at peace? Or are we a country with an uneasy peace, an uneasy war, an unease, a dis-ease, a disease? An addiction, we might say, is an attachment that has worked its way into our neurological system. We depend on a substance without perhaps even realizing it. Whether one is accustomed to alcohol in the bloodstream or accustomed to being able to flip a light switch to get electricity, one cannot remove these dependencies without a lot of distress and withdrawal symptoms. Being creative and intelligent makes one able to use incredibly brilliant mind games to continue an addiction. And similarly, we as intelligent people can be incredibly creative at distancing ourselves from our obligation to respond to this war, which is so uneasy. Perhaps it is becoming the new normal. Willpower and discipline alone do not free one from attachments. The ancient yoga texts assure us of that. We need grace. Grace to help us see our way clearly. That is why I ask us to sing the opening hymn, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." What is that fount of every blessing? There is a source, a force greater than we are, and this is grace. And we can rely on it as we seek to move beyond our attachments, beyond our new normal. We need grace to see clearly, and we desperately need to see clearly in the face of so much complexity. Some of you have told me that you aren't sure what to do about the current war, and you worry that you're doing too little. And this is where our spiritual wisdom comes into play, to help us discern whether we're taking a healthy break from activism, a much-needed pause for reflection to prevent the soul from wearying, or whether we are sticking our heads in the sand like ostriches. The answer is not simple. Are some of us paralyzed because we don't want to acknowledge how we benefit from the conflict? This complexity is perhaps what is so daunting for peace seekers living here in Virginia in 2012 with an election on the horizon. Our state benefits greatly from jobs in the defense industry and military. Money trickles into Charlottesville, supporting the businesses in which many of us work and funding the nonprofit organizations we enjoy. We see a parallel dilemma in the logging in Oregon or the coal mining in West Virginia. We cannot simply say that these industries should be shut down. What about the people who rely on these jobs? Or perhaps is this similar to the dilemma faced by Thomas Jefferson, who wanted slavery to end, he said, but he couldn't economically figure out how to not own slaves himself. The answer is not simple. And yet some people don't have the privilege of putting their heads in the sand while they are Skyping or Facebooking with their soldier family members in Iraq and Afghanistan. They know the answer is not simple. This week I've listened to a lot of diverse songs about war, or war and peace, from many sources, from our Unitarian Universalist songbooks, from an English rock band, The Who, from a Muslim country music singer, Karim Salama. And no matter the origin of all these songs, the songwriter pleads the same thing. Don't let us go to war unless it is really the last resort. We shouldn't be going and killing people unless something essential is at stake. These are what the songs say. The answer is not simple. Questions of war can surely be divisive. What will we lose if we pull out too soon? And is this really a war, or is it just war is a name given to a conflict to maintain access to resources? The answers are not simple. The military-industrial complex is gorging itself while so many others are distracted with bread and circuses. The ethical dilemma for a person of faith is how to look out for the vulnerable among us. The answers are not simple. Deborah opened with a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, who was writing in Vietnam. Vietnam, a land on the other side of the world, using an alphabet so different from ours, a culture based on assumptions so different from ours, and the same is true of Iraq and Afghanistan. How can we expect ourselves to understand, much less think of solutions? The answers are not simple. Civil rights activist Byron Rustin pointed out that when one is protesting, one does not compromise. But when one is in politics, compromise is what you do every day. The answer is not simple. Now, if you were hoping this sermon would offer simple, concrete things you can do, I will offer these two. One, talk to others. Talk to others so that silence doesn't grow and you stay connected and awake. And two, talk to your politicians about a solution that makes sense to you. And I will offer the words that Eisenhower said in the same speech that I quoted earlier. Now, in this passage, he's reflecting about what he will do as he transitions from public life to being a private citizen. And I quote, "Disarmament with mutual honor and confidence is a continuing imperative. Together, we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Because this need is so sharp and apparent, I confess that I lay down my official responsibilities in this field with a definite sense of disappointment. And this is Eisenhower speaking. As one who has witnessed the horror and the lingering sadness of war, as one who knows that another war would utterly destroy this civilization which has been so slowly and painfully built over thousands of years, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight. Happily, I can say that war has been avoided, steady progress toward our ultimate goal has been made, but so much remains to be done. As a private citizen, I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road. I'll read that again. As a private citizen, I shall never cease to do what little I can to help the world advance along that road. May each of us also never cease to do what little we can. In the face of complexity, a spiritual response is to be rigorously awake. The Buddha was awake. He didn't say it was easy. Clearly, it takes practice and compassion to be that awake, to face the complexity. Clearly, what is so horrible about war is its destructiveness to life, and perhaps some of the leaders of war or some of the privileged people who capitulate in war have had some kind of mental numbing. And this is the same tragedy as addiction when it numbs us so much that we allow life to be destroyed. We all have despair, albeit despair of different depths. In the face of complexity, in the face of attachments, it can be tempting to sink deeper into despair. And this is why I asked you before the sermon to read the poem by Mary Oliver. She says, "Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine." And meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear puddles of rain are moving across the landscape. And this, my friends, is grace. Life offers itself to us. May we reach out and embrace it, staying awake. Life offers itself to us. We have a place in the family of things. We can choose not to let this wonderful web of life be destroyed. Seeing the abundance all around us, the abundance that can be shared so we don't have to fight for resources. We can welcome the power of grace to acknowledge that the solution might not be within our solitary capacity. We might not be able to conceive of it in our minds or execute the solution with our hands. Perhaps we need the wisdom of the wider community, the world community. Yes, we can face complexity. Last week in this pulpit, Eric gave the message that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were so horrible, destructive beyond comprehension, and that we must have the courage to look that horror in the face. But he said that is not the only thing we must look at. We must also look to the beauty and the creativity in this life. This month, the theme in our church's liturgical calendar is peace. And my message to you today is not to engage in a passive peace. Engage in an active peace. Just as recovering from an addiction requires daily vigilance, acting for peace in this economy means daily vigilance. What are you already doing that contributes to a solution? And I don't mean a simple solution. The military-industrial complex is just that, complex. The solution may be even more complex. We have the intelligence, the guts, the creativity, but we don't have to do it alone. We have each other, church, community, love comes from the sacred spirit. Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune our hearts to sing thy grace. See the lion and the young lamb dwell together in thy home. Will you try something with me? If you'll take your hand and touch it to your thinking cap, that place that can come up with smart solutions, but maybe sometimes plays mind games or has analysis paralysis. It needs a filter, it needs a guide. So now maybe try touching your hands to your heart. This can be the filter, this can be the guide. And there's so many names for it. Try one with me, grace. This is the place where grace can be heard. Try another one with me, peace. Peace inside us. Try another one with me, love.